and those that are running a little bit late, that's what happens when you're late. You miss the beginning.
All right, well, welcome, friends. Thanks for being here. I've got just a couple of announcements before we jump into the material for today. So as Daniel mentioned, I will be traveling from El Salvador, where I've been the past year, back up to our office in West Virginia next week. So our normally scheduled office hours on Monday will be canceled. But by all means, please reach out to me if you'd like to schedule a special time this coming week or early next. And I would love to talk with you about where you're at with your coursework and your community lab. Please note that you hopefully are making good progress on that community lab, because the final will be due next Sunday on May 30th. And all of next week's class will really be devoted to focusing on the final steps of that. And we ask that you have a draft ready to share ahead of class next week so that we can spend time with your work in breakout groups. Then the only other reminder that I want to give to everyone is that as we are getting close to the end of the semester, we've got, we're on week 14 now, and we've got week 15, and then our last week, just the beginning of June. Please make sure that you are working on finishing up any outstanding work that you might have. I know we had a lot of smaller quizzes, one for each week of reading, and so those could be easy to miss. If I haven't reached out to you already, I will email you again just to make sure you're aware of those zeros, and we can work together to make sure that you are able to finish those up before our semester ends. I also just wanted to flag that as of yesterday, you should have received an email from our registrar, from Chris Roper, about the upcoming deadline to request an incomplete grade. So that is coming up on the 26th, so 1 week from today. If for whatever reason you feel like there's just too much work between now and the end of the semester for you to finish all of those assignments, you're welcome to request an incomplete grade, which essentially you will come up with a plan with the faculty on how you would finish that work given some extra time. And the exact amount of time will vary. We'll work with you on that. Could be, you know, a week to a couple of weeks beyond the semester. And so just let me know if you are interested in that option. We could explore together.
Yeah, as Rosie said, the incompletes, they're very, you know, they will not jeopardize your grade. We have to approve them as faculty though. So the quickest way to get an incomplete is just to email Rosie and I. And we will then provide you, when we, assuming we grant the incomplete request, explain why. And obviously this year with COVID and everything, we certainly are not going to be holding folks to high standards for why they're asking for them. We will give you the information when we respond that you need to fill out the incomplete request. And specifically, we will tell you when you have an incomplete until. We'll give you a new completion date, and you will need to put that on the form. And that's the main thing that we're going to then check, assuming. And if we get a form for somebody we haven't talked to, then we need to come and talk to you, and it's a longer process. Mm-hmm. So the fastest way to do it is just email us. We'll respond, and assuming we say yes, we'll tell you in that email will be the information you need to enter into the form.
So Grace just gave a great question in the chat. Oh, go ahead, Daniel.
I just want to emphasize, it doesn't affect your grade if you get an extension, but it does affect your grade if you hand in your assignments late. So just file the piece of paper if you need more time, because it won't affect you, but it will affect you if you miss the deadlines.
Absolutely, yeah. So you'll get an incomplete grade, and then as soon as you submit that work, your final grade on your transcript will reflect the work that you did. So it's not going to have any long-term impact on your standing in the program as long as you complete it. We got a question in the chat from Grace. Great question. When is the official last day that all grades are due? So our semester, the last week of our semester is Monday, May 31st through Sunday, June 6th. So at that point, all of your assignments should be in. Keep in mind your final community lab, which is the very last assignment you need to do, that'll be graded, is due that previous Sunday. You'll have that one extra week to catch up on anything. And that at that point, when the semester finally ends, all grades should be in. And we need to submit final grades to the university by June 18th. So if you want that extra flex time, you need to communicate that with us, and we'll go through the formal process. Great. Okay, any other questions on grades or assignments or the end of the semester? Doesn't seem so. All right, great.
All right, well, let's go to Peru. So this is, as Rosie mentioned, you've made it, you're almost there. You've made it through both seed and scale. So congratulations, everybody, for those of you who are almost. We have this week, next week, as Rosie mentioned, we're going to be looking at the community lab 100%, and really focused on helping you get those over the finish line. The final week of the course, we will try to take a step back and do some broad synthesis, looking at this course in its entirety as it relates to ACC 601. I think you all might be privileged enough to have a little presentation from Daniel on the role of budgets as it relates to scaling up, as we use budgets in a very different way than traditional development. And so one interesting thing to do as we synthesize and look back on our course will be to look at the very different role that budgets play in scale as you've learned it in this course versus how it's traditionally done. And I think that's a sticking point that a lot of people run into when they then say, I've learned this dynamic theory of scaling up. Why doesn't it work in the way a lot of people traditionally approach budgets? And so we will be looking at that on the final week of class, which means that today is really our last chance to look at this whole and dig into this whole idea specifically of scale cubed. And what I think you've been seeing so far is that in order for scale cubed to really work, there's also generally, it means looking at the functionality of where scale squared played into this. And for this, we have a really fantastic case today. I did notice that when I got on to see who had done the completion quiz earlier this morning, I thought it was pretty funny that nobody actually that I could see filled in the free response question to help us with discussion for today. So I hope you all still saw that, made some notes, because we're going to be talking about that. But I did see many of you, it looked like, had gotten the quiz done and got a perfect score on the questions that counted. And as Daniel will tell you, one thing that's fun about the CLOS program is it really coincided with the original task force of seed scale. And so when we look at some of the work that we were looking at earlier in the course around Tibet, and in this case in CLOS, these were really the original laboratories where we were actively, more than practicing seed scale, we were learning it as we went. But let's turn it over to you all and hear, can someone take a crack at just explaining what is CLOS? What was this case about specifically? When we say CLOS, what is that? It's obviously an acronym, but it's an acronym in Spanish. But more specifically, what was this program that we are talking about today in Peru? Irfani.
Hi, everyone. The class is in Spanish. I cannot read in Spanish, but in English, it is Local Health Administration Committees, which established in 1994 by the Ministry of Health of Peru. And according to this program, each primary care facility center made of have a community committee, and the member of community committee are 6 people. Uh, 3 of them selected by the people in local people, and 3 member selected by the Ministry of Health. And this committee has different tasks. One of them was making annual local health plan. And this committee was a good initiative in this country, and when it started in 1994 and evaluated in 1998 by 3 independent study, the result was very good based on quantitative rate. But the important things that was lack was skill scored because there was not self center for help. This was a short description.
Great, very comprehensive discussion, Irfani. Thank you. Does anybody else want to add anything to Irfani's very detailed layout of what CLOS was? Well, let me ask you a question. How did CLOS come about? Because that what Irfani just described is not the most usual structure. Was this a traditional practice in Peru before 1992? Meher.
Yes, hello everyone. So the class experience was kind of experience inspired from how the villages was defending their villages from the terrorism, or like from the group who made like the violence. So when the inhabitants felt that they succeeded in defending their villages, they thought they can do the same for like the healthcare service. And from that point, they got inspired, and they tried to start this experience, but with a lot of challenges. I think they got the support and the help from the government, from the Ministry of Healthcare, and like from the regional offices there. But besides that, it was like the very, let's say, perfect option for them to help people get better healthcare service, and also to work very close to the community. So they believed that with this kind of service, everyone could benefit from the healthcare service, and even they were visiting people in their houses, and like even offering like a free service to poor people, and trying like to find different solution to finance this service, and to recruit the people, and to address like the local issues. It was like kind of very tailored service to each community. So this is for me like the best points about like the class experience. But as I said, they faced a lot of issues, and one of the main issues and was like the hardest one was like the union from like the doctors and like the healthcare service people, because they thought it will be a kind of competitor or like someone taking their role. And also they lost a lot of advantages when they are working with the governmental service. So those some of the points I wanted to add. Yeah.
Thank you, Meher. Great points. And Matt, be forewarned, I'm going to call on you here in a little bit to build upon your chat. But I do want to, before we go into some of those, I want to examine a couple things that have already come forward. Because I think there's a lot of really interesting pieces of this case for us to build from. And one of them is this point that Meher was saying of Peru had come out of a civil strife, and the villages had felt very, they had to defend themselves. And as a result of that, trust was low. Trust for authority was low, and certainly trust for the government was very low. And I think this is an important point as we look around today, because many of us are in contexts where we're seeing trust for our governments going down. And one thing the class example of it does highlight is the role that giving local voice and local representation can do in building and helping to truly engage these enabling environments. Because as you've learned in this course, scaling up is not about creating a revolution. It's about getting the parts of a system, even if they're national parts, to function more effectively. And so Klaus is very innovative in the way that they approach this design, because most in traditional health, by and large, around the world, a lot of the work that Seed Scale grew out of were the lessons learned in international primary health care around doing vertical extension of health services, forcing people to get health care. And this is something we're going to be seeing now in the wake of the pandemic globally. You know, Rosie's coming up here to get her shot. We still have, in the United States, we have shots available and people don't trust the shots to take them. Okay, so we're seeing this reoccurring, and the only way to build buy-in and engagement in our health system is for people to feel it represents them locally. And this is where, as Meher, you say, and Irfani did just such a great job in explaining how that system was designed with representation from government, representation from the people. And then there was also there was one other member of those committees, which was the local health officer. And that's very important. You have to have some expert who actually really understood acute health services. But to that point, Meher, one reason why it was such a perfect solution is that what those committees were doing more than anything was building trust, fostering relationships. And as you said, there are several players here. So there are still issues with local community buy-in. And there was also the issue of the of the physicians union. But Matt, you then mentioned, let's build on this a bit, this whole point of trust, about what were then the other kind of tertiary results of that trust and engagement that began to happen at the community level that we saw come forward in this case.
I'll give it a go. I think the formation of the nonprofit seemed pretty big in access to funds and being able to reallocate that money to help serve the needs the community identified that weren't being met by the previous healthcare system. So I think through that empowerment that they were experiencing previously and protecting their community, that was able to continue by identifying that the healthcare system wasn't working, and they advocated to get these new ones established to then get them more easily accessible for communities, and just kind of pinpoint the needs that weren't being met previously. I don't know if there's more to add to it. I'm sure there is.
Well, it's a complex case, but Daniel, it looks like, wants to jump in, and Daniel was there. So Daniel, what have we missed? You're muted.
There's some really fun stories here, guys. And so to come back to the point Matt was making, you've all been to the doctor's office, right? At some point in your life, you've been to a doctor's office. And we have a doctor in this class with Herman. So usually you go to the doctor's office and the doctor tells you what's wrong with you and what you have to do, and then you have to pay the doctor. And you have virtually no voice in that process, okay? That's the normal thing we're most familiar with. But as Matt was saying, in this case, the people have access to money because now these local committees are getting the money for selling medicine. That money for selling medicine is not going to the health department. Once they get access to money, the local committee, they can hire and fire the doctor. This is really, really big. Imagine you go into your health clinic and you think that maybe the doctor's not even there. He decided not to come to work, or she decided to do something else. So suddenly the committee fires the doctor. Well, this is really big. So that there's an accountability issue here. The people believe they've got a role, but it isn't the people, it isn't a revolution. The doctor's still on the committee. The government still has, the mayor's office is in the committee. It is a partnership. So they have to work out their differences. And they have to get to commonality. So that's the dynamic that starts to work at every community. And so what communities are experiencing is rising confidence in the system, rising trust. Now, one story that's behind this is that there was a national election that was about to happen in Peru when this whole program started. And the president, Fujimori, was running for re-election. And he knew he was in trouble. So he decided he had to do something to get the people's votes. And his health minister said, I know what you have to do. You have to listen to the Seed Scale Task Force. The Seed Scale Task Force was just created. The health minister got on an airplane, flew up from Peru, and talked to my father, who's one of the co-authors of this case study. My father, as most of you know, was chairman of international health at Johns Hopkins University. But I was present in those discussions, and then we went down to Peru and we began these interesting discussions that are described in the story. So that there was an awareness in the top down that they had to do something. And health was seen as the point of intervention to how to get partnership with the people. Now, this type of thing very seldom happens. Most of you are not going to get a call from the health ministry of your country and saying, we need your help. Okay, you may, but most likely you're not going to get that phone call. But you can see the role in this example of how the political system sees that it benefits by listening to the people. That's the key message I want you to see, is that the political system understands that it has to benefit by listening to the people. And for instance, we have Irfani right now in Afghanistan. The Taliban that is coming into some control in Afghanistan needs to see that it's going to benefit by listening to the Afghan people. In Bolivia, the new president and the political uncertainty needs to see that it has to get some benefit by listening to the people and partnering with the people. And in my little community here in West Virginia, the political system needs to see the advantage of partnering. and the community has to be given some trust and some control over money. And so we'll keep going, but that's the context. And now earlier, you mentioned the role of scale squared. I want to change the question now and say, how did scale squared work, folks? We've got this top-down enabling environment. The government has woken up. The health ministry has woken up so that the top-down is changing. It's in trying to engage the bottom up. What happened with scale squared? And how did that start to change what would otherwise be just a two-way partnership? Back to you, Luke, to follow up on this.
Well, does anybody want to try to answer Daniel's question? As Irfani pointed out at the very beginning, that scale squared was missing. The chapter noted that. But then also, who wants to talk a little bit about model clause? Melchiade.
There in Peru was a lack of self-help center when the people, communities come to visit and learn and return to their respective communities with new knowledge to apply in their communities.
That's the action learning side. What was the experimentation side? Remember, scale squared has two things. One's action learning. They're coming to the model community and they're learning. What's the experimentation side?
I'm not sure if anyone's equipped to answer that right now, Daniel, but I want to draw your attention to a chat from Herman.
Yes, I'm reading it. It's very interesting. Do you want to read it, Rosie?
Sure. Dr. Taylor, the night before, I had a pleasant visit from a former health worker from my country. Herman is in Bolivia, everyone should know. He said that he visited at Peru last millennium. According to him, the Sendero Luminoso, the luminous path that was in the chapter reading, at first time they did not use weapons. Its objective was to replace the government officers by the Creoles, children of Spanish people. In my opinion, I think that the progress of the class scaling up was facilitated thanks to the guerrilla of the luminous path. Am I right?
You are correct, Herman. And there was a big political divide in Peru between the people from the Spanish origins and from the indigenous communities, as you have correctly identified. And I believe, Herman, you have the same situation in Bolivia, with a difference in ethnic groups. And many of our countries have that same difference. I think everybody knows that situation in their country, differences between ethnic groups. So Herman's absolutely correct. And it was the one ethnic group was starting a true revolution, a violent revolution, the Sendero Luminoso. And that revolution, as I tried to say, caused the president, who was actually from Japanese descent, not from the Spanish-speaking descent, okay? That revolution caused Fujimori to say, I've got to do something. So Herman's absolutely right. The role of revolution had a key function in causing the government to wake up. But then the solution moved from being a revolution to being an evolution. And what you saw was that the health systems evolved. The health systems weren't radically changed by outside. The health systems were changed by the inside, with the community having a voice, with the doctors having a voice, and with the government having a voice. Get that? The three-way partnership is happening that is causing the health system to change from the inside. It started as an outside process with the revolution, And then it used the system, it morphed within the system to change. Herman, very good question. Thank you. I hope I've answered your question. But before I turn it back, I want to come back to my earlier question. What was the role of experimentation in the model class? Remember, scale squared has two sides, action learning and experimentation. We actually created 3 scale squared centers in Peru in this program. Only one is mentioned. And that did experiments by trying this service versus that service. Imagine an experiment, intervention A, intervention B, intervention C. What will cause the 3-way partnership to work more effectively? And that experiment came up with some conclusions, and those conclusions were then taken to the government, and a national law was put in place. Because at first this program began under a presidential decree. And then as we did those experiments, we understood how to make the system work better. And we took that process into the democratic process, and the Congress of Peru changed the law, and it's still functioning today. And as of today, 40% of the health services of Peru are delivered through this class system.
So Grace made an interesting point, and let me see if I can try to bring it back around to where I think we also want to go with this conversation. So Grace had mentioned that in our area we have federally qualified health centers, FQHCs. We also have them here in Pendleton County and most of rural America, I think, and just I think urban areas have them too, slightly different model. But it seems like a similar effort to reach out locally, build trust, improve access. But mostly it comes from the top down, and maybe we could learn something from Klaus. Grace, I like the way you're thinking in terms of how, what are our models? How could we learn from them? And I know that at least Daniel can tell us a few ways we can learn from them, because one thing we will talk about here is the push and pull between different top-down players. And we have the same issue with the federally qualified health centers, because one of the main reasons what that designation primarily means is that you can receive federal funding. And so anybody, you could be a non-federally qualified health center, but at that point you're only able to take insurance, you're only able to take money directly from your patient. But in this case, if you want to be able to utilize, the many different pots of federally allocated money, Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, you need to be a federally qualified health center. And this is particularly important in the current era, where it's the FQHCs that are getting all the COVID stimulus money. They're getting the support monies and the support services to set up testing sites and give out vaccine. And a fellow alum of yours identified early on that this system, he works here in West Virginia, and he runs a group called the Partnership for African American Churches. And he identified that our current FQHC system in the United States was heavily biased against racial minorities. And so once again, we see this dynamic of, as you say, Grace, it's an attempt to engage communities. But the way and structure of it, and the fact that it primarily has to do with the allocation of federal funding, it ends up being very non-participatory by and large. And so I think you can see different examples. And this is where we need scale squared, right? We need to see what are the federally qualified healthcare centers that have been able to truly engage the community, because this individual has identified this, and he's now gotten money from the state and the federal government to start up federal qualified health centers across the state of West Virginia. He's going to put in 3 to 5 of them that are specifically around catering to minority populations, and they will cater to everyone. But that's the point, that how these things and these kind of forms of structural violence can take place can manifest themselves very differently. So, and as Daniel will say, that was the exact same fundamental issue when CLOS began to roll out, because the physicians unions were not in support of this. They were not in support of those allocations and the budgetary control going away from the formal health system to the non-traditional outreach centers, for instance. And they said, no, all the money should go to the nice clinics. But Daniel, I know you want to jump in on this, but I see some real parallels. As I said, the timing of this case this year is there's a lot we can learn from it.
Yeah, folks, remember when we were talking about the project in Tibet, and I referenced how an alum of this program, just like you, could be you, went and organized the Pendaba program in Tibet, and it went to such huge success. And he just took seed scale. Norbu did. Well, James Patterson here in West Virginia, who was in the first class of your master's degree, said the churches, and he's a Black pastor who was here in the state, were being discriminated against, the Afro-American community, racial discrimination. He says, I'm going to organize the Afro-American churches across West Virginia. He did that just from his master's work. And it began with just a few $100s. He didn't start, anything big. He said, let's get the churches working together. You could get your mosques working together. You could get some other sports clubs working together. Well, he started and he built this program. And then when COVID hit, as Luke said, he said, he got numbers. And he said, if you're a person of color in West Virginia, you have 1/3 the chance of getting tested for COVID as a white person. Okay? White person's going to get 3 times more likely to get tested than a person of color in West Virginia. So he went to the governor's office and said, this isn't fair. And he lobbied. The governor at first didn't pay much attention to him. Okay, we've got a couple West Virginians on here. I'm sure Grace and Kristen are smiling and laughing. They know who our governor is. But he pushed, and it was unfair. And he said, you got to help the people of color. So he got $3.5 million. And then what's interesting is that with that $3.5 million, he made the churches, 3 to 5 of them, it's changing, into federally qualified health centers. That's what he's doing now. And he's trying to get now $10 million to build that system, growing, using seed scale the whole time. And what is really a little final story, just to tie it up, it was 10 days ago or so, I got a phone call here at my desk, okay? My phone rings, and it's James, and he said, when I got out of bed this morning, I sat on the edge of my bed for 1 hour, and I was thinking about seed scale. He said, I just thought about seed scale for a full hour, and then I went and I worked on my grant proposal for the $10 million for the FQACs.
But,
so you can do it, is what I'm trying to say. Each of you can do it.
Sure, you can do it is great, but I think also therein lies a very clear example of the functionality of scale squared, okay, coming in. So what Reverend Patterson is doing in this story is similar to what Wanoko, I know I have the pronunciation of that wrong, that
Wanuko,
which was the primary scale squared center in CLOS. In terms of, and this is so often what scaling up impact can look like, is taking some localized experimentation that you have seen and identified a gap in an existing system. And through experimentation, you can show others how to make an existing system much more effective. And so what we see, for instance, Grace, that's why I loved your comparison of, in theory, the federally qualified health care system in the United States is an attempt to create participation. most of the time, it at best only works for 2/3 of our population. But through experimentation, and the same was true for CLOS, the same is true for most healthcare systems. The vexing question of healthcare for the past 200 years is, how do you reach the unreached? Well, what we now know is it's through experimentation, it's through innovation that largely is engaging not direct health services, but cultural and social interventions. This goes back to what Matt was saying earlier in the class about the importance of the people feeling empowered. And so what we saw, and we see this dynamic again and again in this case, and you've often heard that there can be different types of top-down or enabling environments. And one thing, don't ever just assume that the most important environment or the only environment is the government. It is normally the biggest, it is normally the most in your face, but it is certainly religious institutions, cultural institutions, professional associations, anybody with money is representing a position of power or authority. And what you saw happening in the CLOS case was this back and forth between these two very powerful top-down dynamics, one, the president's office, and the other, the National Physicians Union.
Let's talk here about I would just, Luke and I have talked. I want to get some of you thinking a little bit. What do you think? Do any of you have any ideas of how you can use this type of an example of what happened in class in your community? So, I mean, just like James Patterson did with his church. Can you see? I mean, otherwise, this is Peru. It's on, Herman is the only one who's close to Peru. It's on the other side of the world from you. But do you see any models here that you can use?
Hi there.
Hi, Paul.
Yeah, this is Paul from Kenya. I think the Pelu case is one of the most inspiring cases that I've seen because it's how the potential of the community has been utilized. Comparing with the last week case where a promising project derailed, it was because of how the government came in, rather than utilizing the people's potential, it took away the people's potential. In Pelu case, the government came in a better way, where it made sure that the community feel appreciated, and that's why there was a success. So in the project, or in the things that you're doing right now, there is need for us to know how now to involve the third partner in the three-way partnership. The relationship between those partners means a lot in the success of the project. When there is no good relationship, automatically the project will fail. But when there is a good relationship, and mostly what happens is that one partner or two partners come up with the initiative, the third partner will join. For example, in Peru case, there is that the community are there who came up with the project because they felt that since they have defeated the enemy, they have the potential to control the healthcare. So that was a community initiative. So the government came in. The way the government came in, it supported the initiative. So in the things that we're doing, as Dan has always been insisting, we need to know how we shall involve the third partner. The third partner will either make the project fail or make it a success. That's my contribution. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Paul, great analysis. And thank you for bringing up, as you mentioned, the syllabus for this week. Very interesting comparison if we look at our Kakamega case from last week, where the government intervention was not that of an enabling environment, but a stifling environment. right? It stopped it. It flooded it with resources. What do others think? How can we learn from these cases and relate them to our own community? Maher, I see your hands up.
Yes, for me, I think the experience from Peru is like very important, and I can get it as example to try something here in my community. When I started like reading this, and like before that, I'm thinking about how we can use more like the public spaces here in my local community. We miss like having like any kind of public park or any green park or garden, but there are a lot. But there are a lot of places that can be used, and I think I'm trying like to see how I can implement the same idea from Peru to make something similar here, with like the collaboration with the municipality and also the local community, how we can make something like that. But also on the same time, I was thinking about like the healthcare system in Tunisia, which is like failing. And we are facing a lot of challenges with the healthcare system here. Sometimes people, they get an appointment like to do some analysis after 1 month or like after 3 months, and which is like very, very crazy, because they can die after like 1 week or 2 weeks, which is like something a bit hard. And also we are facing the challenge of like the trusting like the political system here. People here, they trust like the civil society and NGOs more than like the political parties or like the government. So honestly, I'm thinking to share this story with more people from not just from my community, but I know some people active in the civil society in Tunisia, and even like some political leaders, and I will try to share with them like the story from Peru with them, to see how we can design something like specific for Tunisia. So I have two ideas, one for my local community and another one for the national level, to see if we can make something in other local communities. Yeah.
Let me just do a follow on, because your point is very good. In Peru, there was an effort after the success of CLAS, and as I say, it's been going now for many years, to do the same in the field of education and to get the same type of community committee in education. Now, in many countries, there is community control over educational systems. In the United States, for instance. But the Educational Association of Teachers lobbied the Congress of Peru to stop the introduction of the class model in the field of education. So the challenge here, it was very interesting. The health field was able to use this. The education field was able to stop it. So the key answer here is you have to show success. Don't try to impose the idea. And this is where a scaled squared center is so important, because then you have local evidence if you can show the success. Because if otherwise you're saying, oh, here's a great idea, it worked in Peru. People will say, well, it won't work in Tunisia. But if you can find some examples in your situation of the system working, then it is relevant. So what is that called? It's called building from success, three-way partnership, evidence-based decisions, behavior change. You can see how it all fits together, but it starts with the finding the success.
So
yeah, exactly. Just if I can comment on this.
please,
My idea was like, as there are like some successful examples here also in Tunisia, of the cooperation between like the civil society and the municipalities. So I can build on that, and also showing people like the example from Peru, to say, well, even people, they use it, or like they worked and collaborated on the healthcare service, which is like more sensitive than like managing like Green Park or something like that. So that's why I tried to link things. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Meher. Irfani, did you want to contribute?
Yes, I also think we can do something in my country based on the experience in Peru, but we have some serious challenge. One of them is that they started working on health sector after their victory on the terrorism, but yet we are fighting against the terrorism, and the United States and other countries leave us alone, unfortunately. And you know, last week or maybe 10 days ago, they attacked, there was a suicide attack on a girls' school in Kabul, Sayyid al-Shuhada. And therefore, we cannot define a role for outside in experts to go to the local community and give advice to the people and to the member of some local organization how to manage their local sources. It is a big problem. And the other problem is the trust. As you mentioned, and we read about the Peru, there is a big challenge in my country, that is the trust between, the lack of trust between the people and the government. If we can solve this kind of problems, I'm interested to go ahead and work in education.
Well, it looks like we may have lost Irfani. Irfani, you seem to have died. We can't, you're frozen and we can't hear you. But thank you if you can hear us, thank you very much for the wonderful contribution. I want to just also go back to what Daniel had briefly mentioned about the teachers union being able to stop the class model from going forward in education. And what we see in the case is that the the physicians union tried to do that. And the role we haven't really talked about in all this is that the local government health officers were the 7th member of these local class committees. And that one of the main reasons that class went forward is that in some cases, those people took one side, and in other cases, they took the other. And so what we see when you start to look at the role of scale squared, right? We often think of them as the specific intentional centers that Daniel was talking about. But the fact that half of the original class communities had health officers that were in favor of this participatory model provided a real evidence that it was working and help convince others to do so. And so you often will find these kind of key individuals that are in a position, they are a community member, but they're also in a position of authority or power. And those are key individuals to that you need to get on your side. And as Daniel has said it over and over again, you do that through showing them evidence. Daniel, do you have any closing words for us? We have about 2 minutes left. So
right. First of all, folks, this is really something you can do. It really is. It seems impossible, but find the successes in your community and use them as learning examples. And patiently, with evidence, you can use this as to grow a positive solution. And the pandemic actually, when the system is disrupted, gives you some sort of opportunity. So I'm looking forward to seeing your papers and seeing this continuing, but I have to leave right now for another urgent meeting. The time's up. I know Rosie and Luke will stay on for a little bit, but I'm going to be the first to leave class today with your permission and apologies.
Well, and I actually need to be at that meeting as well. So Rosie is going to close down class, but thank you all for some great participation. We really look forward to reach out. Rosie will be traveling, but I think you all know that I am also available to meet with you all if you email me. And we really look forward to next week, where we'll be pretty much spending the whole time in breakout rooms. And this is really your closest opportunity to just share with your peers how it's going, and get their help. And I know I've heard from some of you saying, we really like to hear and see what our other classmates are doing. So, come prepared, be proud, and share what you're up to, because this can be one of the most fun parts of the course. It also is a great opportunity for you to get some help with areas you're getting stuck on. But thank you all for a really wonderful discussion, and look forward to seeing you all next week.